Welcome to today's episode of Rainer on Leadership. We are your online home for leadership lessons and advice for the local church. I have with me the one and only, most holy Reverend
You got to stop
Dr.
that. You just got to stop
Rainer,
that.
the founder and CEO of Church Answers. I am his son, Sam Rainer. Glad you guys are joining us. Dad, welcome back to your own show.
Well, I'm glad to be back, Sam. And I am recording from Cape San Blas, Florida. So you and I are in the same state, but we are some distance
You
apart.
have moved since the last episode. It was a dramatic move.
Well, I went from one floor up to here because the modem was next to me. And Amy, you cannot, if y'all are watching on YouTube, you can't see Amy. She keeps herself out of the picture here. You can't hear Amy. But she was a little bit concerned because we were going red, which means the signal was not strong enough. So I am right next to the modem. I am looking at the modem. The modem is next to my foot. So I think we should be okay.
I was really concerned in the last episode that you were about to be raptured. But now that you've moved closer to the modem, you're back in the green, and it looks like you're going to make it.
Well, you should be concerned if I was about to be raptured and you were still at the podcast.
I might have mixed some metaphors there. I don't know.
A lot of illustrations. Hey, I'm gonna let you thank our sponsor Tyndale and the NLT Life Application Bible.
We love the Life Application Bible, and as I mentioned on the last episode, our church just switched over to the New Living Translation. It has been an awesome switch. We've got all new pew Bibles. We're challenging our people to read through their Bibles this year. We've got a whole devotional plan that we've created, and we're using the New Living Translation. And so if you are looking for a new Bible, or even if you're not, and you don't have the NLT Life Application Study Bible, it is certainly one that we recommend. This is the Bible that was the winner of the 2020 Christian Book Award for Bible of the Year. It is so readable. What I love about the NLT is the readability, and that's where it gets good marks, but it's also accurate, and we don't talk enough about that. It's exactly. Very accurate as well as readable. But what I love about it is, hey, people don't read their Bibles. They just don't. And what I've heard from the people in my church is, hey, I really like the New Living Translation. So you should definitely check out the NLT Life Application Study Bible. It's the 3rd edition. It's been around a while. It's trusted. It's proven. It's been updated and expanded. So we've got a link in the show notes. Definitely go look at the NLT Life Application Study Bible.
And I think I told you what I was doing. I have I have a regular NLT Bible that I take with me to church, and I use it for study. But I also have a Through the Bible in 1 Year NLT Bible, and I'm taking notes. I got one with the wide margins or with the note-taking capability, and I'm taking notes. Did I tell you what I was going to do with that Bible?
Yes. Yeah, but I think our listeners need to know.
Well, after I finish the first one, we're going to draw straws, and one of you 3 sons will get that one. So when I'm dead and gone, you'll have all of my notes of going through the Bible for one of you sons. If I survive another year, another son will get it. And if I survive a 3rd year, another son will get one. So every year that I'm alive, I'm going to do my own little commentary, personal commentary through the Bible in a year, and each son's going to get it. And then if God gives me 10 years after that, I'm going to give one to every grandchild as well. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, I think that's an awesome idea. I hope that you're able to get through the next 3 years at least, so that we can get one of those.
Appreciate that, Sam. Appreciate that. If not, and you happen to be the recipient of the first one, would you make copies for your brothers, please?
Yeah, I'll be glad to do that.
Hey, the topic today is one of sobriety. It's how to handle a church staff member's moral failure. It is one that you really, is that going to be the best thing to talk about? Not the most fun thing to talk about, but it is absolutely necessary to talk about. So I do want us to look at it, and you've got this in the form of first 4 questions. And the first question is this: what is the degree of the offense? Moral failure is moral failure, not exactly. There's degrees of offense.
Yeah, and you're right. This isn't the most fun topic to discuss. And we do try to be a little more upbeat on this show and not so negative. But we also want to be practical and helpful to the listeners, and these things happen. We're you're a lead pastor, staff person has a moral failure, or you're on the personnel committee and the lead pastor has a moral failure. Or, what do you do when somebody who is paid by the church, a pastor or a church leader on staff, does something terrible? In the case of a moral failure, and by moral failure, we're talking something of serious degree. So, what is the degree of offense? There are different things that can happen that have different consequences. So, somebody looking at pornography one time, which is terrible, is a very different thing than uh, multiple affairs with multiple people in the church. They're both bad, and they both could potentially be disqualifying from ministry. But adultery with multiple people in the church is worse, in my mind, in terms of degree of offense than looking at pornography one time. Um,
And we'll probably have some listeners out there. They'll say, "No, if we have someone on staff watching pornography, it's one and done." But your point is still well made. One time looking at pornography is not the same thing as having multiple affairs with someone.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a leader in the church and you've had multiple affairs with people, that brings up all sorts of questions of abuse, using power in the wrong way. I mean, there's way more consequences to that than viewing pornography, although that's terrible too and can lead to other terrible things. So I don't mean to minimize the terribleness of pornography. At the same time, it's a very important question. What is the degree of offense, and how often has it happened? And did they steal from the church, and did they have an affair, and did they do this, and did they do that? I mean, all of a sudden now, I mean, it adds up. So you just need to make sure you ask the question. What degree of offense happened, who was involved, and really even more important, what needs to be remedied because of the degree of offense.
And then there's the big question. Once it has been discovered that a staff member has had a moral failure or is involved in a moral failure, when you confront him or her, do they deny it? Do they readily admit it? And when they readily admit it, what is their reaction when they admit it? But the first question is, are they denying it? Are they still trying to lie or sin to move forward?
Yeah, and this gets to the case of well, if they admit it, well, and they're repentant, depending on the degree of offense, is there the potential for restoration? All of those questions. If they deny it, that puts it in a whole different pathway. So if there is repentance, I messed up, I did something terrible. Okay, now we're on the path of reconciliation, whatever that looks like, and not every. I believe that there are things that you can do as a pastor, moral failures that completely disqualify you from ministry. So I want to be clear about that. That if you do certain things, you should not be allowed to be a pastor again. That being said, if you're repentant and wanting reconciliation, that's a different path. And no, I didn't do that. Now there's an investigation. There's more involved when the person denies it. Even worse is, oh no, I did that and it's not a big deal. And why are you making it a big deal? Not denying it and just
Yeah.
and just basically denying it by saying it's not a big deal. That's even more terrible. But you have to be very careful if a staff person denies the moral failure. You need to do an investigation. If it's to certain degrees, obviously it needs to be reported. In the case of sexual abuse or any kind of abuse, it always needs to be reported, regardless if the staff person denies it or not. And that requires outside intervention, not just an inside internal investigation. But if there is a denial, obviously you're going to involve more people. You know, you're gonna bring in a greater group of people to deal with the situation. If someone admits it and is willing to work through reconciliation, whatever that looks like, then you don't need as many people to deal with the problem.
This third question, when I saw how you had outlined this, and by the way, Sam and I take turns creating the content. We don't necessarily alternate every time, but sometimes it's original with Sam, sometimes it's original with me. This one is original with Sam. And so I was looking at his 4 questions, and the third question about what is the level of remorse and repentance, and I'm thinking, levels. And then it just hit me. Within I'm going to say 2 years, I had two stark contrasts, and these were both men who had both of them pornographic failures, and they were each confronted. I was in the room both times. The first time I was in the room, the person who was committing the sin said, "Man, I'm sorry. Can we just keep this to ourselves?" And had a very nonchalant attitude about it. The other one, when confronted about it, broke down crying and said, "I'm such a fool," or something to that nature. One was looking for a way just to sweep it under the rug. The other, upon being caught, very much like David when confronted for his sin, broke down and said, "I am the sinner." Is that what you're
Yeah,
referring
I
to
think it
there?
is. By the way, no one ever confesses everything all at once. That's just a universal principle that should guide you in everything that you do. So, someone gets caught, or even just proactively admits something, which is always good, right? That the one who has done the offense takes the initiative to go to someone to seek accountability. So that's a higher level of remorse. But even then, people don't always admit everything all at once. They don't tell you everything. I've really yet to encounter a case in any situation where somebody said, "Here is literally everything," and that was literally everything. So there are degrees of remorse and levels of remorse, in the way that you described. Is this person immediately repentant and broken, or is this person trying to sweep it under the rug, or is this person just saying things but really being defiant? There is a different level of discipline that is required for different levels of remorse. The higher the degree of remorse and brokenness, the less harsh, maybe that's not the right word, but less firm the discipline has to be in terms of ultimatums and "you will do this or else." But
And for clarity, you're saying all things being equal,
yes,
because there may be different types of directions that you go depending upon the offense, but all things being equal, the level of remorse and repentance as
correct.
well.
Yes. And it's just a question to ask yourself if you're having to deal with the situation. And oh, by the way, you will, if you stay in ministry long enough, and if you manage a staff, or if you have leaders in your church, this will be something that you deal with. Unfortunately, moral failures are far more common than we would like to admit. And the church has a terrible history. All churches, all denominations, all backgrounds has a terrible history of sweeping things under the rug, which is absolutely the wrong thing to do. If this is something that is abusive in any sort of way, it must be reported. And I've already said that, but I'm going to say it again. And you have to deal with it. You cannot sweep anything under the rug, even when the person is showing the proper levels of repentance and willing to go through a reconciliation process. Church discipline still must be enacted. It's just a different kind of way of doing church discipline when the person is broken and willing to reconcile than when the person is defiant.
This fourth question, you have to check the church's policies and to see if there's a covenant in
Yeah.
place.
Okay. So this is very important from a biblical perspective, of course, particularly if you have a covenant, which we do. At West Bradenton, we not only have a covenant for members, we have an additional covenant for our pastors. So every pastor is held to the standard of membership. And then there are other things that pastors are held accountable to that are additional requirements, which makes sense because we're supposed to be held above reproach. That being said, you may encounter some legal problems if you don't follow your church's policies and your church's covenant with how you handle a moral failure. So before you start making decisions about what needs to be done, let's assume that somebody got caught, they admitted it, and you have to deal with it. From a legal perspective, you need to go check those policies, check the personnel manual, check the covenant, make sure that you don't do something that is against those guidelines, because you can find yourself in a world of legal hurt if you wrongly terminate somebody. Even if they deserve it, there is a process for that, and you need to understand those guidelines. And as As somebody who's
And
done this a few times, unfortunately, in a few churches, having to deal with moral failures on staff, absolutely follow your own guidelines there.
and you bring up the legal issue. It may be that one of the first actions that you take is to call the legal authorities, depending upon the offense. If there is sexual abuse taking place, particularly of children, if there's something of that nature, that becomes a criminal offense. And so you have to address those legal issues as well, in addition to all of these other things where we're talking to
Yeah,
the
yeah.
person one
If
on
if
one.
it's to if it's to that degree, the first step is to call the authorities and report things properly. You don't even need to look at your bylaws to do that, because you have a spiritual obligation, and to some degree a legal obligation too. But I think the spiritual obligation is more important. You're not doing this just because you want to cover your own butt when it comes to legal stuff. You're doing it because it's just the right thing to do. So report it to the authorities, and then just make sure that, hey, we're following our process and our bylaws, our covenant. And oh, by the way, let's assume you're not even dealing with this issue. Let's assume that you don't even think you'll ever have to deal with this issue. You love your staff, everything's great at your church. You know what? It's still a good idea to go check that covenant, check those policies, check that personnel manual right now to make sure that there's a process covered in there. If not, you're going to want to add one. Now's the time to do it before something
But
happens.
by the way, I often go back into your past, which of course is my past as well. So I'm going to go back to 1988, and we were in St. Petersburg, Florida. And the first time that I confronted any type of moral failure, I was a part time staff person. And I still to this day don't know if the accusation was true or not, but someone had said that she was abusing her child. Okay. So I called up a counselor in the area that I trusted, and this counselor told me, here are the legal things you need to do right away. And I didn't know that. I mean, that was 1988, but I am so grateful. And to my knowledge, the accusation ended up being false, but I still had to go through the process.
Yeah. Even if you do believe that, hey, there's a likelihood that this is false, you still report. You still let the investigation go through. It's a very painful thing to do. I know I've had to call the Department of Child Services, and we've had to report things at the church, and it's just part of the process, and it's terrible and it's awful and no one wants to do it. But when you're dealing with the protection of children, or really anybody in the church, but especially children, you must go through that process. If you don't, you will regret it. And you certainly don't want to build a culture in your church of not dealing with things. We've just built a culture here at West Bradenton of, we hear something, we report it, and we cooperate with the investigation. Full stop. There's just no other option. You have to do that. When a staff person has a moral failure, you can't you need a plan for the guilty individual, but you also need a plan for the church. You need to be as transparent as you can with the church to tell people what's going on. Speculation is never good. You've got to tell the truth, and I understand that you may not be able to share every little gory detail about what happened. But when it comes to moral failure, I do believe that more transparency rather than less is important. Even if you state something once, you put it in writing once, you put it out there, you make your statement, and you don't say anything else. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, by the way, but at least you have been completely upfront from the very beginning, and then you can move on. Now, clearly, there is investigations and all the fallout and the consequences that you have to deal with, but I'm talking in terms of public statements to the body at large. And not only that, sometimes that the public statement to the body at large needs to include the community, because it could be something to a
So,
certain degree to where others need to hear it as well.
I've got an unusual situation where someone was accused of actually taking money during a building program. And so we had to go through the whole process to make sure that every dollar was accounted for, that everything, that again was another time when you were probably unaware. We were in a building program in a church, and someone said that someone was skimming some of the money off of it. Did you know that? You knew that,
You've
didn't
told
you?
me the story. Yeah. And here's what I would say to financial. We've been talking about more on the sexual side. That's kind of been the implication of the podcast so far, but financial moral failures are serious as well. And
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 common.
very common. The way that you deal with financial moral failures is you have a good process on the front end that prevents them. Now, I understand if somebody's going to steal something, they're going to find a way. But if you are wrongly accused, if you have a good system in place with cameras and processes, and you don't even have access to the funds, you have multiple people in the books that are double checking everything, it's going to be very hard for somebody to wrongly accuse you. Anyone could say anything of you. But if you have very strict processes on the front end, you can at least answer an accusation with, here's all the documentation, here's all the debits and credits, here's everything that I've ever done, here's the camera in my office that shows everything,
Uh,
and it's going to help. So I would just say be proactive with measures that prevent people from
let,
making wrong accusations.
let me interject a moment, Sam. This one did turn out okay. The money was accounted for, every dollar was found, but we had to go through the process. Why? We had a good financial system that worked. We had a good builder, a reputable builder. The combination of those two caused us to do that. I mean, that is one of the reasons why we recommend good stewardship companies. We recommend good builders like Brown, that we have been recommended for some time, and the fact that they're not only great builders, but Brown Church Development has a system in place that does everything from beginning to end. It accounts for everything. It does consultation. When you get a builder like that and you have a good financial process, that's one of those ways that you're going to protect
Yeah,
yourself.
it's something I love about Brown Church Development Group is their system, their process. It's above board, and they protect the church. Not only protect the church, protect the staff and the pastor. And they're very, very good. They build not only all that, they build really good stuff too. So, yeah, Brown, it's churchdevelopment.net if you're interested. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, I went astray for a moment. This is good stuff, Sam. We got 4 questions that need to be answered. What is the degree of the offense? Does the staff person deny it or not? What is the level of remorse and repentance? And what are the church's policies and or covenant? We went in a lot of different directions here, but all of this comes back to the essence of it. What is the offense? What is the level of offense? And how does the church
Yep.
respond? Those are the things that we should be looking at. We always want to thank our good friends at Southeastern Seminary. If you may have heard this on a previous podcast, but Sam and I did not know the other had done this, but we each had recommended someone to Southeastern, and we each had recommended them to the Master of Arts in Church Revitalization. And so you recommended your student minister, Devon. I recommended one of our platinum clients at Church Answers, and now they'll probably be in the same program together, like a 37-hour program that you can take on campus, but you can do it all
Yeah.
online as well. It's a great program. So we would recommend to you that you look at Southeastern. And if you want to go to Southeastern and apply, make certain you write Church Answers in the application for the code. That's Church Answers without a space, and your application fee will be waived. Southeastern Seminary is not just about theological education. They're about training and preparing people for ministry. So thank you again for being here on YouTube and watching, or listening on your favorite podcasting app. And wherever you are, continue to listen to us and to watch us at Church Answers, where we are growing healthy churches together.